I see that some people are trickling in. Welcome, welcome to all the attendees who are here. We're expecting a few more to come in along the way, but I just wanted to say, hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm from Sunstone Management. For those of you who don't know, Sunstone is a diversified private capital sponsor firm located in Southern California. We invest in diverse early stage tech entrepreneurs, and we're very happy to partner with Mentorcam today to put together a webinar. Hopefully this will be a good resource for all of you budding entrepreneurs. And with that, Rune, take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Rune Hauge. I am the co-founder and CEO of Mentorcam. To those who don't know me, we are a platform and a marketplace where early stage founders like yourselves can get access to mentors. They're typically difficult to access for personalized one-on-one advice on topics that are relevant to you as you grow your startup. We're very lucky to have one of our top mentors with us here today, the former CTO and co-founder of Tovala, a smart oven company. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but they built a smart oven. Y Combinator alum from 2016, went on to raise more than $60 million in venture capital funding. The most recent round that was announced was Series C round last year. So this company has grown quite a bit, has had an amazing journey. So welcome to Bryan Wilcox. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, thanks, Rune. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic, fantastic. So today we're going to talk about building the product side of the business. How do you do it? What do you need? Who do you need? What should you look for in a CTO if you are not a CTO or if you don't have one? Bryan can lend some perspective on that. And then towards the end of the session, we'll open it up to questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll put you on camera and you can ask Bryan directly. And if anything comes up along the way that you'd like clarification on, please feel free to put that in the Q&A. I'll try to address it as we're having the conversation. So let's just dive in, Bryan. I mean, a smart oven, is that even all that technical? Do all startups need a CTO like you? Why or why not?
So I think it depends. As with any answer in this realm, right? The answer is it depends. But I would always fall on the side of if you're a startup and you don't have something based on technology, you probably want to really stare hard at your business model because most startups get their edge and get their one of their competitive advantages from some element of technology in their business model that allows them to move faster, do something differently than it's been done in the past, things of this nature. And so for those reasons, yes, I think you want a CTO in the business. The CTO should be the topmost business partner to the rest of the C-suite, and they're representing and making sure the technology and product side of the organization is operating.
So as a CTO for a company that does hardware, and I believe there's also other components to it. What are sort of the qualities that you have to possess, or what are the qualities that founders who have at a hardware company should look for in a CTO?
Right. So I think it's important to understand what technology you're working in. So Tovala had hardware technologies, software technologies, and food manufacturing technologies that were all, I would say, keystones to the business model. And so I had to have some degree of expertise in all of these. And so when you're looking at your own business, understanding what that is for your business is pretty important. You know, a steel technologist is going to look very different, obviously, from somebody who's doing software. And then even within the software realm, are we talking mobile experiences first, web experiences? Are you looking for, is this going to be a back end heavy, front end heavy, things of this nature? And so understanding what you're looking for so that you can go find somebody who has both. I think you're really looking for someone who has trade skill in that industry. Someone who doesn't have trade skill, I'd look really carefully at, because especially in startup days, you're needing people to produce. So for instance, for Tovala in the early days, like, so when we were at YC, we have the smart oven, we have a food service. We had a fleet at that time. We had 12 of these ovens in the garage that I myself was wiping out, cleaning, and making look like new before they get deployed to another test customer. I was, soldering circuit boards, assembling them myself. We were writing the software that ran the ovens. We were starting to write software that ran the e-commerce side of the business. And then I don't know if you've ever seen a Tovala meal, but it's an aluminum tray that is a cook into the meal. So for the audience here, the way Tovala works is there's a countertop smart oven, looks like a toaster oven basically, but it's got a Wi-Fi chipset and control board in the side of it. And that allows it to connect to a server that we also produce food. That food arrives much like a HelloFresh or a Blue Apron. Well, of course, Blue Apron's barely existent anymore. At the time, that was a good reference point. Nowadays, it's any meal kit that would arrive in the mail. But then it goes in your fridge, and when you're ready to eat, you take out a meal, scan a barcode, put the meal in the oven, and press start. That was the extent of the user experience. In the early days, we needed food. So I was literally using a clothing iron to seal the plastic to the tops of those trays. That's what day, 1 to 100 or something looks like. So you need somebody who's willing to do that kind of work at the early days, but then also be sophisticated in business and understanding what the ambitions of the business are, understand how all the business side of things work as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like a combination of the necessary skills to actually produce the MVP or the product that you want to sell, and then also kind of that hacker mindset, like I'll do whatever it takes to get this product out there. So but you also mentioned something interesting. You built this oven, right? The hardware, and then there's a software component to it. Did you do both?
I didn't do much on the software side, honestly. When we were putting the team together, I knew enough about the software side to be dangerous. In a prior life, I was a doctoral student at University of Illinois, and we were writing fairly big software bases for doing data analysis and things of this nature. And I am definitely not going to suggest that I could sit down and write one of these big consumer applications by myself, but I knew enough to be dangerous. Okay. And one of the first principles I've found, and something I think is good advice, is to delegate what you know, or delegate what you can sort of adequately judge the results. Because it's hard to delegate things you have no clue about. And so what I found was a really good partner, Adam Brakane was his name, who we brought on very early, and he did all of the software development while I focused mostly on the hardware and helping get some of the food operations up and running.
Right. So you knew the core product.
Yeah.
Right. That was your specialty, and then the sort of ancillary product you found talent you delegated to. So let's talk a little bit about that stage too, because I think at least if you're a founder and you raise some capital and you're starting to hire, you'll quickly realize that hiring technical talent is also a challenge. It's not just, hey, I have this money now. Okay, all these engineers are just going to come to me because then now I can finally pay them. Can you talk a little bit about some best practices for hiring technical talent, especially in the early stages? Because Tovala grew quite a bit, right? I'm sure it's a little different when you can pay market pay and you're a well-known brand versus you're in the trenches. You're still maybe ironing on the meal kits. Right? How do you find that talent? What are the best practices?
So I'll answer that in two parts. If you're a non-technical founder, I think one of the most important things you can do is start to get to know technical people in the area of your business and start to learn what that culture's like. so that you can start to speak their language and understand who they are as people, what gets them turned on, like what they enjoy doing, and what excites them about a particular industry, role, problem. You're particularly looking for people who can fall in love with the problem that you are solving, and they have the skill sets to solve it, like we just discussed. At that point, then you're also looking for someone who isn't going to be like, oh, well, the technology is complicated, you won't understand it. You need someone who's good at communication, can help translate technical concepts into business language, if you will. Like, this is sort of first and foremost if you're hiring senior technical people, because this is going to be your right-hand person or persons that you're going to lean on for that side of the business. And then as you start to, either that person starts to hire technical talent, or if you're a technical talent yourself, like one of the biggest things that you're going to be looking for is getting credibility in the eyes of engineers, especially the hardcore builders who you're going to need. They can be a pretty skeptical lot in my experience, and that's a good thing, because these are the people who are responsible for making your product work. And especially with computers and technology, things tend to be kind of binary. It either works or it doesn't work. And you need to have people who can operate in that black and white world well.
Can we hone in a little bit on the establishing credibility part? How do you do that?
Well, the easiest way is you don't have to be better than they are at what they do. In fact, you shouldn't be. Otherwise, like, why are you hiring them? Like, they need to be better at it than you are, but you need to be conversant, and they should be able to, they need to understand that you understand and deeply respect the skills that they've built and what they're bringing to the company.
All right.
It's interesting, especially in the technical realm. You'll often hear people like, it's who you know, not what you know. But for a lot of technologists, it's a heavy dose of both. You obviously have to have the people relationships in order to find access to the opportunities. But for especially early stage technical folks, what you know is incredibly important. You can't BS your way out of whether the product works or not. And so the establishing credibility is understanding that, like, if you're hiring, like, being able to acknowledge and demonstrate to these folks that you understand that, and you understand the pressures and constraints in which they're working, and that you're going to create an environment in which they can do their best work.
Okay.
And maybe in shorter words, don't come off as the pointy-haired boss, right? You don't want to be that. It's going to be real hard to hire good talent.
Yeah, for sure, and especially if you're non-technical.
You're non-technical,
like
it's even harder.
Like myself, I don't know how to write code, and I work with people that know how to do that, right? So I approach that with a great deal of humility, because I realize that they're doing something that's inherently difficult.
Yeah.
And they're better at it.
Sense of mutual trust, right?
Yeah.
Like you really have to get to a sense of real mutual respect and mutual trust. So that's the kind of credibility, because you really do need to hire technologists who are willing to roll their sleeves up and get right in there and get it done and ship things, right? You're not looking for technologists that have sort of turned into mid-level managers. They're not going to produce things. And so what ends up happening, like a larger company, for instance, you end up with like sort of quote unquote mid-level management that kind of softens the relationship between different parts of the business and the really hardcore producers on the technical side. And in this case, none of that insulation exists. So everybody really has a good respect for one another to be successful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And when do you hire? Do you hire the moment you raise capital?
Heavens, no, you hire when it hurts. Now, if you're a non-technical founder and you're building a product that has technology, then you're going to have to get your technologist, right? And in some ways, that's kind of similar to how I met David, my co-founder at Tovala. He was a business student at the time at Booth, and we got introduced through a mutual friend. And David was getting a lot of feedback like, hey, this is a great idea. Hey, the business model's great. It has a lot of legs and potential, but you really need a technical co-founder, because you need to help anchor this, help figure out who's blowing smoke and who's real. And so we got put in touch by a mutual friend, and that turned into a friendship, turned into a partnership, turned into the business.
And that's step one.
That's
Get someone on board that will
non-technical founder.
I can build. Yeah, yeah.
And then after that, you hire when it becomes incredibly painful in some dimension that, you know, if you can hire well, you can move the business further faster. Like you get a really high leverage on your own bandwidth. That's one of the other markers, right? But that has to be against real business progress. Like, you know, Rune, like you said, like, oh, we raised all this money, or like we've grown from 2 people to, I don't know, probably 400 or 500 people now, grand total, and including our manufacturing staff, right? Those are only interesting metrics if the top line metrics like unit economics, revenues, costs, and all of these other things are coming in line. And so you shouldn't be hiring until you've got some of those fundamentals worked out, because hiring is one of the best ways to burn through a lot of cash in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, probably the biggest line item for.
Oh, certainly, it's certainly in the early days of a business. Like you just go down the income statement, right? It's pretty simple. Salaries and wages is going to be your largest line item by far.
Yeah, so something to be mindful of as well. It sounds like, and when you first started out, did you have product market fit out of the gates immediately, or was there a point where you realized that okay, we have it? When was that inflection point?
I think that boy, product market fit's one of those slippery things to try to define, and I love it because it's one of those things, you know it when you see it or feel it, and then those who have found it try to use all these analogies to describe it for others so that they can try to sense it when they're getting close. Some of the best ways I've heard, you know, I think Michael Seibel had an interesting take on it. You know, it's when demand is just so far outstripping supply that you're scrambling to keep up with the market, trying to suck product out of your company. That's I think a great way to look at and think about product market fit. Another way to think about product market fit, I suppose, like coming out of the gates in a new startup, you're pushing a boulder uphill. It's a system task, right? You're sitting and just trying to roll that thing uphill because you're having to force it forward through vision, force of will, and your own energies and labors. As you start to achieve product market fit, meaning you've really found a product that has a pain point and you're selling the painkiller, and the painkiller is fractional cost, whatever the pain is, and that fractional cost is still a massive win for you in terms of profitability, you're going to feel that, and it's going to start to be like, whoa, we're no longer pushing the boulder, now we're having to chase this thing. It's got a momentum unto itself, and it's just going to start crashing through walls whether you're there or not.
Oh, that's a really good analogy. You're trying to keep up with the boulder instead of just pushing it and running back down when it rolls back down. No, I like that. What was that inflection point for you at Tovala? When did you know? What happened? Can you describe that?
Yeah, so for Tovala, we had a, you know, your standard sort of MVP type process where we would build the simplest version that you can think of that captures the essence of the value proposition. So in our case, we literally took old Cuisinart ovens, took them apart, replaced the electronics with ours, put them back together, and put a Tovala logo over the Cuisinart logo, and demoed that to customers. That got enough traction and interest that we moved to our own platform. That one started to take, but it was still Sisyphusian, right? We're still pushing the boulder, trying to get people to buy these things. We updated the look at, so then you talk to customers, like that's the biggest thing, right? Talk to customers, try to understand what they're thinking, understand your, you know, look at your crossing the chasm type model, know who your early adopters are, start to understand the markets as you start to move towards a more mass market offering. For us, it happened after we did a refresh on the oven, and we made some unlocks in our marketing program where we moved from marketing to an individual to marketing to a couple. where we knew there were certain household dynamics that we were marketing to. And that happened in like late 19. And we were from selling, you know, few ovens a day into lots of ovens a day. And then it just starts to go. And then you're doing everything you can to keep up with production.
So this didn't happen immediately after you graduated from YC in 2016.
No, so we finished YC in April of 16. We launched the software, food manufacturing, and oven components of the business all at the same time in April of 2017. We struggled along. We did another hardware iteration and launched that one in the fall of 2018. And the fall of 2019 is when we really started to take off. The part between like your first launch and that first sense, it's called the trough of sorrow, and there's a reason for that name.
Yeah, the trough of
There's
sorrow, valley of death. Yeah. Well, so you kept it pretty lean then, the operations up until then.
Yeah, and that was sort of core to the culture. I think, you know, until 2019, we were still the software team. Grand total was, I think, like 5 people at most. The oven team was 3. Now, remember, we did a lot of our work with a contract manufacturer. So if you extend into their network, then it's like a lot more, because obviously you need more than 3 people to manufacture an oven. But in terms of our stateside resources, we're on Tovala payroll. It's 3.
You were still getting your hands dirty. You were still scrubbing the ovens yourself.
Yes. Well, to give you a sense of getting your hands dirty, then after we got all that done, I was running overnight shifts with Keely in 2019 to make production. So the founder's job is never over in that regard.
Yeah, you can't delegate that away. Just
some of those things. I mean, we were there in for a period of 2019. We were doubling our weekly orders week over week, and that's in food manufacturing, right? That's not like spin up another server, engage the load balancer, do things, right? This was like double the amount of raw ingredients we needed to order every week, double the beef, double the pork, double the chicken, double the lettuce, double the greens, double the onions. And you do that week over week, that math gets really hard, really fast, and trying to get a supplier base that can keep you in, you know, in business in a sense. So yeah,
it's a good problem to have, that you're getting so many orders that you're
what do they call it?
That's
Rolls Royce problems.
The
thing is, after a little bit, there's still problems.
Right, but better problems, right?
Better
now the boulder is kind of almost rolling away from you, and you're keeping up. So let's talk a little bit about the definition of a typical product development cycle. If there is such a thing as a typical product development cycle, can you share a little bit about your experience with that and how you define it?
Yeah. So I think of product development cycles as it's a loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's recursive. It runs back on itself. And it starts with, like, the very first start is you start to get a sense and an awareness of a problem and a market segment that you want to solve. That's the idea of the startup, right? Then your first step is talk to your customers. Like, even if you know very little else, you don't have to have product. You don't have to have hardly anything. You need to first starting to talk to customers and doing customer development. Understand what the pain points are in their life. Really get sharp on what you're solving, because the 2 paths look like this. If you can define the problem really well, then you can synthesize a solution that, you know, covers the problem well. If you don't define the problem well, you start to take a test and see approach on solution side that can consume a lot of energy and a lot of time. You're kind of throwing darts and waiting for feedback. So you want to be getting as much proactive feedback as you can. Once you've got that well defined, then it's time to synthesize ideas, right? Come up with the idea. Then you need to build that in the fastest, scrappiest way possible and put it in front of those customers. Remember, if you're solving a pain, they're going to be interested in any painkiller. They're not going to care what the bottle looks like. If you're building vitamins, all of a sudden you got to get all your marketing right, everything else like really set up right. And that's like a non-starter for startup land, because your probability of getting that before you run out of money is almost zero. So you got to understand the pain point. You start to synthesize solutions, build the scrappiest version that you can and give it to the customer. Let them test it, right? Ship fast, iterate quickly. So then as soon as that happens, now you got conversation going again, and now your loop's already started. Because you didn't have much invested in that particular solution or version of it. You start getting feedback, you understand what to improve, you go make an improvement, give it back to the customer. Very quickly, you need to ask them to pay for it. Because that's the real test. That's the scoreboard, right? Don't ask them what it's worth. Don't ask them if they would pay for it. Make them pay for it. So the way we did that at Tovala was the very first versions of this were those scrappy ovens that we gave to customers, and we gave them like 3 meals to try for free, because like we were nothing. Like we had no even web presence at that point, right? They'd try it. If they liked it, we'd say you have to buy the meals next week. If they said no, we knew we had something wrong in the meal experience. If they said yes, we took their money. We used a PayPal account, took the money, right? And we did that for a few weeks. Now that's not a particularly scalable way of operating that particular business, right? So at some point we said, all right, hey, we're really glad you're a happy beta customer. We're going to be turning off the service for a period of time because we have to retool our manufacturing shop, and we're going to be back online and commit to some X weeks. And then we started shipping food again and taking money in a more sophisticated manner that was more scalable, right? But you don't want to build the scalable version at first start because it's probably wrong.
Right.
So typical product development, in my sense, is talk to customers, build scrappy solutions, ship early, iterate quickly.
Yeah. So you charge pretty much immediately.
And try to charge. As soon as you start to deliver value to customers, you should be getting paid for that. And it's important on a bunch of fronts. It's important for revenue. Like if you go talk to, like if presumably you're going to be using investor capital to be doing this work. And if you can't get to profitability on that first tranche, you're going to have to go get more capital. If you're going to go get more capital, why? One of the most powerful things that you can do is show revenue.
Yeah.
Next, like even more powerful than that is revenue with positive unit economics and clear paths to improved margins.
Worst case scenario, you fund your business also, and you don't need to sell more of your company.
Best case. Because the other thing is that like you don't need to sell more of your company. You might choose to, but that puts you in a different negotiating position. Yeah,
absolutely. You are always in a better position with more leverage if you don't have to
1,000%
raise capital. Yeah.
And about, and those things, like some things aren't reasonable. Like one of our YC batches was boom. So if you can talk about a moonshot, almost literally, not quite literally, but almost, right? Supersonic jet. That was their startup idea. They're going to go make the affordable version of the Concorde, if you will. I'm sure I messed up that pitch, but in a nutshell, that's what they are doing. Their capital to burn and proof points are very different, but in a consumer business, you should be able to get to that pretty quickly, because with consumers, you're basically planning for relatively small expenditures in big markets. So you should be able to prove out revenue models pretty quickly. Yeah,
makes sense. And I'm sure even in Boom's case, they're talking to their customers as they're developing the supersonic jet.
They're very early on, like they're chasing LOIs. They're looking for contracts.
Yeah.
Like they may not be able to deliver the product, but they want to have a committed sale.
Yeah.
And in fact, like if anybody here is working with anything in that realm, like that's a great way to fund your business. It's POs. If you have POs from established either wholesale or big business, like banks will fund POs, and bank money is a hell of a lot cheaper than investor equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're not selling chunks of your company, clearly. So I want to hone in on a few things that you said. Well, first of all, with the defining the problem really well, as opposed to just shooting darts? What was that problem with Tovala? Because most people already have food, right? So what was that was not the problem.
Right.
Right.
So Tovala solves a very first world optimization problem, right? Like here where this business operates, when it sells into, people can clearly get food. The pain points, the real problems, we're able to get food quickly that are healthy with very low effort.
Right. Was affordability part of it or not so
Affordability
much?
well, affordability is always a part of it, but the
Mm.
thing is that any good business is a value-based sale, right? And so if the customer's prime, like in at least Tavala's case, if the customer's primary concern about food was cost, they had no interest in us. Like there
Yeah.
were a whole bunch of reasons why they had no interest in us, right? They're going to go to probably the frozen food aisle if cost is the number one concern, because that's basically the cheapest way you can get calories.
Right.
And stuff, right?
So
So that wasn't the thing for us. So people were willing to pay, just like you go, like, I don't know, a comp might be going to a hotline at like a Whole Foods or something, right? It's prepared food, it's faster, but you're paying more there, but you're willing to pay for it because the marginal benefit in terms of its health qualities are better, and taste and things of this nature.
right. So you were able to essentially find that problem of convenience and wanting to have quality, maybe also healthy meals quickly like this.
Yeah, so it was, so for us, the demographics is part of it, but psychographics was probably larger. It was like, how do people think about optimizing their time and feeding themselves?
Mm.
For folks who were, some of them even enjoy cooking, it's just not how they wanted to spend their time every day of the week, and they didn't have alternative mechanisms. Like we turn out to be an affordable, I'm not saying low cost, we're not the value-based decision, right? We are it's affordable, really healthy, fresh, delicious food that's ready in 20 minutes or less.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
And then
was the value prop that we were circling in on. And like in terms of demographic segments, that was, you're talking about people who, a lot of solo diners, folks who are, because cooking for one really sucks. Folks who are high earners, and it made sense instead of something else, so that they could save time for other more important activities like family or pets or exercise or something. And also people who are just sick and tired of cooking.
right.
Right.
Right. And
So
I'm assuming that, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm assuming it's the food, right? That's the problem in and of itself, not so much the oven. So the food is what you're making money off,
Still,
right?
yes, of course. Yes, the oven, the food is the prime revenue model. And I still clearly remember a conversation with Michael in the very early days, and there were a lot of food tech companies at the time, and a lot of those food tech companies were heavy on the tech, light on food. So he's like, if the food experience sucks, nothing else matters.
Exactly.
Because that's what the customer was buying, right? And the problem had to do around getting the right kind of food at the right value propositions and mechanisms. That's what we were solving with technology. And we weren't selling technology, we're selling food, right? The technology enables that food to be delivered at the different model that was better than what came before. And so when you're looking at a lot of B2C businesses, you either have like sort of lifestyle brand businesses that differentiate based on something about what you're telling the world about yourself, but the product itself is otherwise commodity. Those experience are very hard. Or you have a technology angle, right? The technology angle makes it better in some definable way from a utility perspective to the customer. Those tend to be high value, high growth startup opportunities.
Yeah, so it's the delivery mechanism, right? That's the differentiator, where people are still consuming that end product, which is the food. that's why the Tovala oven is more scalable than Bryan's Delicious Meals.
Very few people buy software. That's what the software
Yeah.
does. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That's what the product does and the outcome it delivers.
Yeah, and that's why I say talking to customers and defining it. You know, you hear founders talk about product in the context of their technology. And it's like, usually the first thing I want to hear is like, what problem are you solving for your customer? Okay, now your technology, why does that provide an interesting competitive advantage over other alternatives? That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't understand the customer and understand their problem, love the problem and love the customer, it's going to be really hard for you to get like engaged well enough to do a good job solving it. Right. Their job is to be experts in their problems. Your job is to become an expert in understanding that problem and then solving it for them.
Yeah. You don't want to be you don't want to have a solution looking for a problem. You really need
that's
to.
A really rough place to be. Honestly, that's where a lot of new technologies start.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's usually technologists thinking out beyond the horizon of application. But then that's why when you hear technologists talk, they're always looking for the killer app.
Right.
That's what powers it into existence. God knows how many new technologies exist that nobody's ever heard of because it doesn't solve anybody's problem.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just whenever there's a new trend, you see a lot of it. And you see a lot of these companies also get funded. Web3 a little while ago, crypto, now probably generative AI. So
right. Understand what your differentiators are and make sure they're defensible.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And so you know, talking about understanding differentiators and a little bit about what's specific to you and your product. So how do you, as a founder, how do you approach tailoring the product development cycle to the unique needs of your startups? How should founders think about that?
So like for let's see where to start. One of the things, if you're tailoring a product development cycle to your particular business in your particular market, I think understanding, are there any natural dynamics in that market? So for Tovala in the early days, people ordered ovens once. The majority, like we would see big pulses during like back to school because people were reestablishing patterns of life in the fall. I'm not sure it had anything to do with school. It's just back to school time period, right? Coming back from getting back into a rhythm. Black Friday, always, because consumer goods. And sometimes you'd see things in the new year. We were a healthy option. You could reestablish new patterns. And then there's, you know, a smattering of other sale periods. So when you think about ovens and oven iterations, we were looking at those time periods and making sure that product development cycles would fall against something of that nature. For food development cycles, they ordered every week, right? So what you were having to think about was dropping development cycles in on ordering periods. So it was important to think about those drops. Software, because our software powered the ordering and all the other things, those usually, you know, you would usually need more than a week to make real progress. So you do it like every 2 weeks. So thinking about natural periods and natural time cycles so that you can start to set a cadence. Because in a lot of startup land, you talk about sprints, but reality for a startup to survive is to set up to run a marathon. So that means setting up a cadence that you know you can maintain, and then starting to set up all the operations of that cycle on that cadence. So understanding your business, its breathing rate, its natural pulse, and some of its cadences is going to be important. So that then you can do like, how do I talk to customers? How do I come up with the next scrappy idea? Ship it, get it in their hands, talk to customers again, rinse and repeat. Because you want to get that, and you want to get that in the shortest time frame that makes sense. But if you force it too small, it's not going to work, and you're just going to be constantly frustrating yourself.
Right. So having those data points, knowing that, hey, these are the times people are buying the oven, right? Yeah. Now we understand that cycle, and then understanding that, okay, the meals just need to vary.
Like you discover some of those after the business matures. In the very early days, you probably won't know some of those things. So you're going to just want to try to press and push until you start to get a sense for them, and then incorporate those into your model going forward. I think
right. So yeah. So again, probably being really close to the user is key, talking to them. And
the general, that general principle of staying very close to users and talking to users. Now, I suppose we should maybe expand on what that means just a little bit. You're not just talking to users.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
sharing the news about the day and talking about the weather and whatnot like this. Like, that's not particular. You need to start developing tactics and patterns of behavior that put you in regular contact with your customers on a number of levels. One would be sort of actual having conversations. There's nothing like human contact to develop a sense of identity with identification and relationship and empathy and things of this nature with another human. And to be clear, your customers are humans. Don't ever forget that. So you want to be doing that. You also need to start collecting metrics on your product, things that would scale beyond having conversations, right? So watching various usability metrics and seeing how they're touching things, what's going around, where you're getting rage clicks, things of that nature. So that's talking to your customers as well, but it's more of an observational, I would call it, more of an capacity. And then as you start to get into revenue and things, you're starting to look for patterns in ordering and understanding that stuff. That's talking to customers as well. That's starting to abstract from a single customer up to a persona, up to sort of a market segment. Now, what's interesting, right, is that you're gonna, if you look at this sort of like at different levels of Zoom, you're gonna be running the Zoom knob in and out regularly, because you're gonna want to come up and look at like segment behavior as a whole, business behavior as a whole, and understanding sort of the broad metrics that are saying how your business is trending. Then you're going to want to go down and look at the next layer so that you can start getting your product teams oriented on the right problems. And then you're going to want to go down one more layer and stay in touch with your customer, because if you don't do that, you start to wander, bad things happen.
Yeah.
Times, right? And when you're talking to customers, you want to make sure that there's a book called The Mom Test. It's an okay book. I think it's pretty good. The biggest thing is it'll start getting you thinking about how to talk to customers in ways that don't invite them to lie to you. Remember, I mentioned something about customers being humans too. Humans, more often than not, like to be liked, and we have a very strong sense of reciprocation, right? So if I do something nice for you, you want to be nice to me, things of this nature. But when you're talking to customers, you're trying to get them to do things with the product and whatnot. They're not going to want to tell you the baby is ugly. So what you have to do is try to get them to tell you the baby is ugly without asking them that directly, right? So like, oh, what a cute baby. This is a terrible analogy. I don't know why we're going here, but it's going to be fun. So let's take it out, right?
Let's do it.
So how would you describe a baby that's maybe not particularly cute? Oh, well, that like smushed up flat nose, maybe the eyes are too close together, tall forehead, no hair, I don't know, things of this nature, right? And it's like suddenly you're like, oh, you just told me the baby's ugly, but you didn't tell me the baby was ugly. So I know what I can go back to do to fix it. Now, I'm not suggesting doing plastic surgery on a baby. We're talking about technology products. So what that means is like, tell me about your day at work. Oh, I did this, and this. Well, how much time did that take? Oh, it took me 5 minutes to do this, 6 times did this. Do you enjoy that time? Do you feel that, oh God, I hate spending time that way. That's the worst thing in the world. Okay, interesting. Why do you consider it the worst thing in the world? Well, because if I didn't have to do that, I could do this other thing. It's more important. Does that add more value? How much more value does that add? And you start to establish these things that are around to help you value the problem and what it's costing them and what you're really trying to do. Like, are you trying to build an app that does a thing, or are you trying to save this guy time?
Right.
And if you're going to save him time, well, is the technology idea that you had, is that actually the solve? Right? Like a case study, and this was like, I know of this one where a customer came and said, hey, we need to write this piece of software to help us understand what box a particular shipment should go in. And we want it to be real time and have a monitor on the wall over the shipping station. And so when an order comes through, they can touch the barcode, it tells them what to put it in, so on and so forth. Good on the product designers here, they started looking at this and they're like, that seems like a pretty complicated thing. You don't have that many different stuff. Like, maybe we should just make a big laminated sheet that has some outlines on it. And when the order comes in, you figure out which one it fits in, and then you put it in that box. right?
Yeah.
So that was a hell of a lot cheaper. It was the better solution, had better usability, didn't use any software. Well, fine.
Yeah.
That's
because you honed in on the problem and you realize what you're actually solving for, and instead of just like, okay, here are all these cool features and things that we can do.
That nobody cared about, right?
Yeah.
Right. The other one was paying the engineering company, like, I don't know, this was a real thing. They paid a consulting company to build an inline scale to test for boxes. There was a manufacturing company that had boxes leaving empty, like they didn't get a product in them, like it went down the line as a thing, right? And so they did this really complicated scale solution. So as boxes rolled across the line, came across the scale, they could detect whether or not it had stuff in it, the right amount of stuff, and it would kick it off or not, right? And so they put the thing into place, and then a few weeks later, it was like, wow, it got better. Like, oh, we've solved the problem. And it went all the way down. And then one of the line managers went out and saw a bunch of empty boxes, like just kind of haphazardly scattered off the side of the line. It's like, what's going on here? And they're like, oh, well, that stupid scale kept screwing up and giving false positives. So we put this fan over here, and if an empty box went by, the fan blew it off the line. Right. So you really want to understand what the problem is and think critically about like the simplest, scrappiest way to solve it. Right. And unfortunately for a startup entrepreneur, that may mean you don't have a business.
Yeah.
Right. But it's better to know that sooner than later, because you'll have wasted your life, investor capital, so on and so forth. So you really want to understand that. Right. I talked to a founder recently, thought it was a great quote. You're not going to get rich off of paying yourself a salary out of investment cash. You're going to get rich on building a big business and owning equity in that business. So don't be thinking about trying to protect your own idea or your own thing. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Acknowledge that, move on to the next idea. God knows there's plenty of problems that need solved.
Yeah. It's a tough recognition, I think, for a lot of founders, realizing that they didn't have product market fit. They're not really solving a big enough problem, or the solution isn't working, and then pivoting.
That's why it's important to hold in your head. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Yeah.
Because if you get the problem solved, you don't care, and then you can move on to the next problem.
Yeah, I think that's something to wise words to remember. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I like that. We do have a few minutes left. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. So if anyone has a question for Bryan, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll put you on so you can ask the question yourself. If you prefer not to ask the question yourself, you can also put it in the chat, in the Q&A. I mean, but we have about 10 minutes left, so I think we have time for a few questions. And Jake will.
Here's where we get a little interesting. We're going to run this. We're going to count to 15 and let that uncomfortable silence hang there. It's a guarantee somebody will come in with a question around 12 to 13 seconds.
Okay, let's see if that happens.
Oh, it got in a little
bit. We got one. We got one. We got one from, I apologize in advance if I'm butchering your name, Maliha.
Can they see my, let's see here. Can everybody see it? Yeah.
Jake, do you want to go ahead and put Maliha on and let her ask the question?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna allow you to talk so you can ask it directly to Bryan.
Hey, sure. Bryan, thank you so much. Just quick question. You mentioned that book on speaking to customers. I couldn't hear all of it. I heard mom, and then I didn't hear the rest of it.
The mom test. Boy, that's a softball question. We're gonna have to work up with something more. The mom test is one I'm familiar with. If you scratch even a little bit, there's going to be a deep literature in how to develop conversation techniques for the purposes of understanding what you actually want to know from your customers rather than inviting them to lie to you. These are sort of survey instrument techniques called instrument in the social science circles. It's a whole process of developing survey and conversation techniques to draw out deeper meaning. You know, one of the simple rules is don't ask yes, no questions. And then it goes a lot deeper than that.
Okay, that's great. I just have a follow-up question to that question. When you are speaking to customers, would you recommend, as a founder, kind of doing it yourself? I know you kind of talked about, you know, it might be difficult for people to tell you, you know, they think your baby's ugly or, you know, your product's ugly. So would you recommend, or who would you recommend on the team to kind of conduct those in-person interviews?
Oh no, you as a founder should be doing it. Absolutely. And that's why it's important to learn how to talk to customers well. But the notion of separating yourself from customer voice, even 1 degree, is going to be a disaster. I know that maybe sounds hard to believe, but you really do, especially in the early days, you need to be really close to those customers. You just have to make sure that you're not asking them, is this a good idea? If you say, is this a good idea? They're going to say yes, right? And you don't want to be in pitch mode. You want to be in asking questions about their life mode, asking questions about, and then listening for areas of friction or things that hurt and asking more about that. You probably want to be closer to a therapist, if you will.
All right, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so we got another question here from Greg Gompers. Greg, I'm about to put you on.
Oh, sure. All right.
Yeah, we hear
Yeah,
you.
okay, perfect. Yeah, so my question, I really love the breakdown you gave, and I was curious. I want to say that you said you got into YC around like April 2016.
We finished
And then,
we were the winter batch. We started in January and wrapped in March.
okay, so finish there. So I was just curious, like, how much funding did you need to raise between, you know, getting out of YC, well, starting YC, and then like until you guys found your product market fit, which was in like mid 2019?
Yeah. I'm gonna have a hard time answering exact numbers because our fundraisers didn't necessarily time up real closely with certain launches, but that was in the low millions of dollars. Like, so when we started YC, we had, I don't know, 50, 60 grand, something like this that we had collected. And then we pretty quickly collected a couple $100,000 more. We did a $200,000-ish, I think, Kickstarter campaign that brought some money in, and then early sales. That was like, for us, short of being able to spin up the line more quickly, doing pre-sales was an indicator of product more, you know, market traction. So that was an element. So we had another, you know, $100,000 and probably $1 million seed round, things of this nature. I'm gonna have a hard time. My memory is going to be a little fuzzy on exactly which of those bumps was where. That was more David's side of the business, and I was mostly at my head. I mean, I was spending a lot of time in China those days, actually. But yeah, I'm sorry. It was, I tell you if I remembered exact numbers, but by the time we got, I think what you asked was like, how much had we raised by the time we got to product market fit? And I'd say we probably had deployed a couple $1 million by that point.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for helping rehashing that. Definitely
Not sure if that was
get a perspective.
I think the other thing though is like, you know, there's a reason that most startup founders come from already like upper middle class to wealthy families and are in their early 20s because they're already living broke, but they have enough sort of family money to keep them ramen safe for a few years, which gives you runway for doing this. And that's why, and that's kind of the way we were when we were starting to get things started. You really have to understand like the money piece of the startup is like, that's the liquid that keeps the blood flowing, and really being honest. And this is why it's so important to not hire unless you need to, and don't live an extravagant lifestyle. Like it's that simple, because any money you don't spend is money you don't have to raise. So those kinds of dollars for a hardware, software, and food manufacturing business were astonishingly small because we were running incredibly scrappy at that point. The business still runs pretty scrappy for given its size and span of operations compared to what some of the comps are and what they've raised. So I consider, fat unit economics, big recurring revenues, and low raise amounts to be the marks of a good founder. Because those are saying you're paying attention to the right business metrics.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for answering that.
I think the latter part might come to a surprise. It comes to surprise to a lot of people, like low raise amounts. That sometimes sounds counterintuitive, but it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta remember the incentives of what you read, right? People like to read about big numbers, but some of the biggest numbers we've watched flame out in extraordinary fashion over the last few years. Big capital is not a marker of success. Just
no, that makes a ton of sense. I think we have time for one more question. So if anyone has a burning question they want to ask Bryan, now is the time. 2 more minutes.
Let's do it.
Let's see. Anyone?
We can count to 15. If not, I have a question from that we got sent earlier.
That was one I learned from teaching.
Yeah, that's good. I like that technique.
It's uncomfortable, but people require something around 12. Like if you just think about yourself, it requires about 12 seconds to conceptualize a question. You need some silence. If you're paying attention to somebody else, you're not able to get it going in your own head.
Yeah. Well, I don't see anything coming in, but I was one of the questions that came in that I thought was pretty interesting is outsourcing a CTO a viable option? Why would you say yes in some cases, no in others, or do you think it is at all?
I think so. When I think about outsourcing a CTO, I think there's a difference between outsourcing a CTO and like a part-time CTO. I think that a part-time CTO could be an okay patch because there's, for whatever reason, you're not able to find quite the right fit, and it may be better to have somebody who's like a really good fit and can do this sort of part-time until you can get bootstrapped into a better solution. An outsource where you're like hired gun, you got to be really careful with what the work product's going to be out of that relationship, because you're hiring a mercenary, and what you really want is a missionary inside the company who's an evangelist for the product, the business, and that kind of thing. And so you have to look very, very carefully at the subtle incentive structures that exist in those relationships so that you know you're getting what you need out of it, right? The whole point of like the CTO is to make really wise investments in the technology base that's going to power your product going forward. That means that person needs to invest time with customers, invest time with the team, invest time with the broader industry. And that can be really hard to get a hired gun to do that.